North Atlantic, 1901. A faint, almost imperceptible clicking, a rhythmic stutter against the constant hiss of static, pierced the ether, carrying across hundreds of miles of open ocean. This was not the expected cacophony of a storm, nor the familiar hum of the ship's own machinery, but a deliberate, coded sequence of electrical impulses, a message plucked from thin air. Guglielmo Marconi's team, huddled in a Newfoundland receiving station, understood the profound implications. Humanity had harnessed an invisible force, capable of bridging vast distances instantaneously, a power that promised unprecedented connection, but also, inherently, unprecedented disruption. The stakes were immediate and global. Control of this ethereal medium would redefine communication, commerce, and ultimately, conflict. The initial marvel of wireless telegraphy, its capacity to transmit signals without physical wires, quickly transitioned from scientific curiosity to a vital operational tool. Early operators, often young men drawn to the novelty and perceived prestige, sat before crude spark-gap transmitters and coherer receivers, their ears finely tuned to the subtle nuances of Morse code. They were the first custodians of this new domain, their fingers dancing across keys, their minds translating electrical pulses into human language, effectively bridging the chasm between vessels at sea and shore stations or between distant landmasses. The sheer volume of information that could now traverse previously impassable barriers was staggering, transforming isolated outposts into nodes within a nascent global network. The Marconi Company, a pioneer in the field, rapidly deployed its systems, recognizing the commercial and strategic value of instantaneous, long-range communication. Their patented apparatus, characterized by its robust construction and relative simplicity, became the standard aboard merchant vessels and naval ships alike. A typical shipboard installation comprised a powerful spark transmitter, capable of generating peak powers approaching 10 kilowatts, and a sensitive magnetic detector receiver, tuned to specific wavelengths, primarily in the medium frequency range between 300 and 1,000 kilocycles per second. The antenna, often a series of wires strung between masts, provided the necessary aerial for both transmission and reception, its length carefully calculated to resonate with the operating frequency. The promise of this technology, initially seen as an unmitigated boon for safety and coordination, quickly revealed its dual nature. Naval strategists, particularly in the years leading up to the First World War, began to grasp that if one could send messages, one could also intercept them. The very act of transmission, a burst of electromagnetic energy into the atmosphere, was an announcement, a broadcast of presence and intent. Early naval exercises, often simulated engagements in the North Sea, demonstrated that a ship's position could be triangulated with reasonable accuracy by multiple receiving stations simply by detecting its radio emissions. This invisible footprint, a necessary byproduct of communication, transformed the vast, concealing expanse of the ocean into a potentially transparent battle space. The German Imperial Navy, with its advanced technological capabilities and a keen understanding of strategic advantage, was among the first to systematically integrate radio intelligence into its operational planning. Their naval radio operators, far from being mere message relays, were trained in the intricacies of direction finding and traffic analysis. They were taught to recognize the distinct fist or sending style of individual enemy operators, to log the frequency and duration of transmissions, and to meticulously record call signs and message preambles. This data, seemingly innocuous in isolation, when aggregated and analyzed by specialized intelligence units ashore, began to paint a detailed picture of enemy fleet movements, dispositions, and even tactical intentions. The act of sending a message, a seemingly benign operational necessity, was simultaneously an act of self-disclosure. The airwaves above the English Channel, 1940. The early days of the Blitz brought a cacophony of signals, a dense tapestry woven from the urgent chirps of coastal radar, the staccato bursts of RAF fighter control, and the longer, more rhythmic transmissions of naval convoys. This constant flow of information, critical for coordinating defense and offense, also revealed an inherent vulnerability. Every transmission, every pulse of energy, was a signature. The operational logs from Fighter Command's 11 Group show a sustained average of 1,200 distinct radio events per hour during daylight raids, each a potential beacon. German Freya and Wurzburg radar systems, though primarily designed for target acquisition, possessed secondary capabilities for intercepting these emissions, triangulating their origin with increasing precision. The very act of communication, essential for command and control, simultaneously illuminated the positions of the communicators. Analysis of captured German intelligence reports from late 1940 revealed a recurring theme: the ability to discern patterns in Allied radio traffic, the consistent power output of a specific ground station, the predictable intervals of a convoy's position reports, even the characteristic keying style of an individual operator, all contributed to a growing library of identifiable signatures. This wasn't just noise. It was a language inadvertently spoken by Allied forces and understood by the enemy. The technical specifications of the Type 11 ground-controlled interception radar, while revolutionary for guiding fighters, also meant its powerful, sweeping beam was easily detectable at ranges exceeding 150 miles by German listening posts in occupied France. Its operational necessity clashed directly with the emerging understanding of radio silence as a tactical advantage. The sheer volume of signals required to manage the Battle of Britain created a dense electromagnetic fog within which enemy intelligence could discern patterns and glean critical operational details. The sheer scale of radio usage, driven by the need for real-time coordination across vast fronts, obscured the subtle threat it posed. Engineers focused on signal clarity and transmission range, optimizing for communication efficiency, without fully grasping the inverse relationship between signal strength and operational security. Each improvement in radio technology, while enhancing Allied coordination, also amplified the potential for detection. The realization slowly dawned that the airwaves, far from being an invisible medium, were a battleground in themselves. Every frequency, every modulation, every milliwatt of power contributed to a complex auditory landscape that could be mapped, analyzed, and exploited. The very act of speaking, however vital, carried with it the inherent risk of being heard by the wrong ears. The doctrine of continuous transmission, deeply ingrained in military practice by the interwar period, rested on the fundamental assumption that information, like ammunition, was a resource to be expended freely and constantly. Field manuals from multiple nations, including the British Army's Wireless Telegraphy Training, Part 1, 1937, and the U.S. War Department's FM 24-5 Signal Communication, 1940, explicitly detailed protocols for maintaining open channels, often emphasizing the immediate reporting of observations and orders. This constant chatter, a cacophony of coded bursts and voice transmissions, was seen as the lifeblood of modern maneuver warfare, ensuring that commanders at every echelon possessed the most current understanding of a fluid battlefield. The technical infrastructure supporting this doctrine was robust, designed for redundancy and resilience. A typical infantry division in 1941, for instance, might deploy over 300 individual radio sets, ranging from man-packable SCR-300s for forward observers to vehicle-mounted SCR-284s for battalion command posts, and larger, more powerful SCR-193s at divisional headquarters. These sets, operating across a spectrum of frequencies from medium wave to very high frequency, were engineered for maximum power output and range. prioritizing the ability to punch through interference and reach distant receivers. The SCR-300, for example, had a rated output of 0.3 watts, providing a reliable range of 3 to 5 miles in varied terrain, while the SCR-193 could achieve ranges exceeding 50 miles with its 25-watt output. This emphasis on raw power and continuous broadcast was a direct legacy of early wireless development, where overcoming signal attenuation and atmospheric interference was paramount. Engineers focused on maximizing the signal-to-noise ratio at the receiver end, often through brute force transmission. The production logs from RCA and Western Electric for the period 1939 to 1942 indicate a steady increase in the manufacturing of higher wattage vacuum tubes and more efficient antenna systems, reflecting this prevailing design philosophy. The assumption was that a stronger, more persistent signal was inherently more effective, irrespective of its content or the security implications of its omnipresence. Strategically, continuous transmission facilitated centralized command and control, a paradigm favored by many armies seeking to coordinate large-scale operations across extended fronts. Commanders could issue directives, receive status updates, and adjust tactical deployments in near real time, theoretically achieving a superior level of battlefield synchronization. This approach was particularly evident in the German Blitzkrieg campaigns, where rapid advances and coordinated air-ground operations relied heavily on constant radio communication between fast-moving armored columns and their supporting air elements. The perceived benefits of this immediate, pervasive communication outweighed any abstract concerns about enemy interception. Ideologically, the doctrine reflected a belief in the inherent superiority of information saturation. The more data flowing through the network, the more informed and decisive the command structure was presumed to be. This created a culture among radio operators where silence was often interpreted as a failure, a break in the chain of command, or a technical malfunction. The pressure to maintain contact, to always be on the air, was immense, reinforced by training regimens that emphasized speed and accuracy of transmission above all else. This ingrained habit of constant broadcast would, in time, become both a strength and a profound vulnerability. The rhythmic pulse of Morse code, once a lifeline, began to betray its users. Operators, initially focused solely on message delivery, slowly perceived a pattern of enemy reaction that correlated too precisely with their own transmissions. This dawning awareness, often piecemeal and anecdotal at first, coalesced into a chilling understanding. The airwaves were not private channels, but a shared, vulnerable medium. Early in the conflict, the sheer volume of radio traffic, particularly from rapidly advancing or retreating units, obscured the subtle indicators of interception. A division might transmit its position, and hours later, an artillery barrage would fall. This was often attributed to aerial reconnaissance or local informants. The direct causal link to radio silence, or its breach, remained elusive for a time, buried under the fog of war. As the conflict matured, and both sides developed more sophisticated radio direction-finding DF capabilities, the evidence became harder to ignore. Intercept stations, initially simple receivers, evolved into complex arrays capable of triangulating a transmitter's position with increasing accuracy. A typical German FUMB, Funkmessbeobachtungsgerät system, for instance, could pinpoint a submarine's general location within a 5-kilometer radius from multiple shore stations, a process that might take 30 minutes from the initial signal detection. The tactical implications were profound. A commander ordering a detailed situation report over the air might inadvertently be signing his unit's death warrant. The enemy, through diligent listening, could piece together troop movements, supply routes, and even command structures. A single, verbose transmission from a frontline unit could reveal its presence, strength, and immediate intentions to an attentive listener miles away. Intelligence reports from captured enemy personnel and decrypted communications began to confirm these suspicions. German signals intelligence, known as Funkabwehr, had established a vast network of listening posts across occupied territories and along the front lines. Their operational logs, later examined, documented thousands of intercepts daily, meticulously categorized and analyzed for actionable intelligence. One such log, from a Funkabwehr unit operating in France in 1944, recorded an average of 1,200 unique Allied radio transmissions processed per 24-hour period. The realization that every signal was a potential beacon for the enemy led to a re-evaluation of fundamental communication doctrine. The speed and convenience of radio, its primary advantages, were now seen as double-edged swords. The very act of transmission, regardless of content, broadcast presence. This understanding began to shift the emphasis from constant, detailed reporting to a more disciplined, often sparse, use of the airwaves. This strategic pivot was not universally embraced. Field commanders, accustomed to the immediate flow of information, resisted the notion of deliberate communication blackouts. The perceived operational risk of not knowing outweighed, for many, the abstract threat of interception. Yet, as the evidence mounted, particularly from units that had suffered disproportionately after heavy radio use, the argument for silence gained traction. The technical countermeasures were initially rudimentary: shorter transmission bursts, increased use of ciphers, and frequent frequency changes. But these were often overcome by the sheer persistence and evolving technology of the interceptors. The true defense, it became clear, lay not in obscuring the message, but in eliminating the signal itself. The absence of a transmission, the void in the electromagnetic spectrum, became the ultimate form of concealment. The silent stretches on the radio, once indicative of equipment failure or operational lull, began to signify something else entirely: a deliberate act of tactical discipline. Commanders started to issue orders for radio silence, not as a temporary measure, but as a default operational state, to be broken only when absolutely necessary and with the utmost brevity. This shift marked a profound change in the psychology of battlefield communication, where the unspoken word held more power than the shouted command. The airwaves, once a constant thrumming tapestry of orders and acknowledgments, began to thin. The shift was subtle at first: a reduction in traffic volume during non-critical hours, then an increasing reluctance to transmit routine reports. This wasn't a failure of equipment or personnel. It was a deliberate, nascent strategy emerging from the operational experience of forward units, particularly those engaged in reconnaissance and infiltration. The initial impetus was survival. The direct correlation observed between radio emissions and swift, often devastating enemy responses. The German Funkabwehr, or radio counterintelligence, had developed sophisticated direction-finding capabilities. Their Y stations were not merely passive listeners. They were active hunters. A typical Y station employed arrays of adcock antennas, often mounted on rotating platforms, feeding signals into high-frequency receivers like the Telefunken EBL-3. These systems, when networked, could triangulate a transmission's origin with increasing precision, reducing the potential error radius from several kilometers to mere hundreds of meters within minutes of a sustained broadcast. The observed operational range for effective triangulation against ground-based transmitters was approximately 50 kilometers, though atmospheric conditions and transmitter power could extend this significantly. Allied radio operators, particularly those supporting partisan groups, were operating behind enemy lines, learned this lesson through bitter experience. A short burst of Morse code, perhaps 20 seconds long, might transmit vital intelligence, but it also painted a target. Interrogation files from captured SOE agents consistently detail the enemy's interrogation focus on radio schedules, call signs, and message lengths, indicating a clear understanding of the vulnerability. The average lifespan of a clandestine radio operator in occupied territories, once regular transmissions began, was recorded in one British intelligence report as approximately 6 weeks, a stark metric of the danger. The strategic implication of this vulnerability was profound. If every transmission carried an inherent risk of detection and compromise, then the absence of transmission became a form of concealment. Commanders began to weigh the immediate benefit of a communicated order against the potential cost of revealing a unit's position. This wasn't merely about avoiding direct attack. It was about preserving operational secrecy, maintaining the element of surprise for future actions. The ideological underpinning shifted from a demand for constant situational awareness to an acceptance of controlled ignorance as a tactical advantage. The silence grew, not as a void, but as a deliberate act of operational security. It was a calculated risk, trading immediate communication for long-term survival and strategic surprise. The airwaves, once a conduit for command, transformed into a potential betrayer, and the operators, once defined by their ability to connect, began to master the art of remaining unheard. The institutional inertia against embracing radio silence was profound, deeply rooted in decades of military doctrine that prioritized communication as the lifeblood of command and control. From the earliest days of telegraphy through the advent of wireless, the prevailing wisdom held that more communication, faster communication, equaled superior command. Field manuals across all major powers of the early 20th century detailed elaborate systems for relaying orders, reporting positions, and coordinating movements, almost always emphasizing the speed and reliability of radio as its primary advantage. The idea of deliberately not using this powerful tool, of actively suppressing its utility, struck many senior officers as anathema, a self-imposed handicap. This resistance was not merely philosophical. It was intensely practical. A division commander, accustomed to receiving hourly updates on his forward elements, found the prospect of a communications blackout disorienting and terrifying. His training and experience had instilled a deep-seated reliance on a constant flow of information, to make decisions, to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. The technical infrastructure itself reinforced this reliance. Signal Corps units were meticulously trained in establishing and maintaining robust radio networks. Their performance metrics often tied to message throughput and connection uptime. To then advocate for their deliberate idleness was to challenge the very purpose of their existence. Logistical records from the British War Office in 1941, for instance, detail procurement orders for over 12,000 new wireless sets, alongside a corresponding increase in training schedules for radio operators, reflecting a continued push for expanded communication capabilities. German signal units, similarly, boasted of their ability to establish secure radio links across vast distances within hours, a point of pride and a testament to their technical prowess. The sheer scale of these investments, both in equipment and personnel, created a powerful institutional momentum that was difficult to redirect. The perception was that these resources existed to be used, not to be deliberately silenced. The strategic implications of this ingrained mindset were significant. Commanders, particularly those accustomed to static warfare or large-scale conventional maneuvers, often struggled to grasp the asymmetric advantage silence offered against a technologically advanced adversary equipped with direction-finding capabilities. Their operational plans were predicated on rapid, coordinated movements, often requiring continuous radio chatter for synchronization. To suggest that a unit might simply disappear from the airwaves, relying on pre-briefed objectives and strict timing, felt like a dangerous relinquishing of control. a gamble with unacceptable risks. The concept of controlled chaos through silence was an alien one. Quiet reflection revealed that the most ardent proponents of radio silence were often those who had personally experienced the consequences of its absence. Junior officers and non-commissioned officers, particularly those involved in reconnaissance or special operations, had witnessed firsthand how a single, ill-timed transmission could betray their position, leading to devastating artillery barrages or swift enemy encirclement. Their reports, often dismissed as anecdotal by higher echelons, spoke of the tangible cost of every burst of static, every spoken word over the airwaves, the evidence of silence's power accumulated at the sharp end, far from the polished map tables of headquarters. The English Channel, June 1944, a vast armada comprising 6,939 vessels of all types moved with an unnerving quietude across the choppy waters, its progress shielded by a carefully constructed radio silence that had been meticulously maintained for weeks. The success of Operation Overlord hinged not just on the sheer volume of men and material, but on the absolute surprise afforded by the absence of the constant chatter of radio waves that normally preceded any large-scale military movement. Every transmitter, from the smallest infantry set to the powerful shipborne long-range units, remained inert, a disciplined restraint enforced across an unprecedented scale. This enforced silence was a radical departure from established military doctrine, which often prioritized rapid communication for command and control, a doctrine born from the lessons of the First World War, where static lines of communication had proven disastrously slow. The shift represented a profound understanding of the electromagnetic spectrum as not merely a medium for transmission, but as a potential vector for intelligence gathering by the enemy. German radio direction finding stations, particularly those along the Atlantic Wall, were known to be highly effective, capable of triangulating the positions of transmitting units with increasing accuracy. A single, prolonged transmission from a major command vessel could compromise the entire invasion fleet's location and direction of travel, unraveling years of planning and preparation. The discipline required to maintain this radio dark was immense, extending from the highest echelons of command down to individual soldiers. Training exercises leading up to D-Day rigorously drilled operators in the protocols of silence, emphasizing the critical importance of not breaking transmission under any circumstances unless explicitly ordered. Damage reports from pre-invasion rehearsals indicate that a small percentage of operators, approximately 0.5%, failed to adhere to the strict silence guidelines during simulated emergencies, necessitating immediate retraining and, in some cases, removal from critical positions. This meticulous attention to detail ensured that when the real operation commenced, the human element of the radio network was as reliable as the equipment itself. The German High Command, despite their extensive network of listening posts and sophisticated direction-finding equipment, detected no significant increase in radio traffic that would indicate an impending invasion of such magnitude. Intercepted communications from German intelligence assessments, later corroborated by post-war analyses, consistently reported normal levels of Allied radio activity in the days leading up to June 6. This absence of electronic signature allowed the invasion fleet to approach the Normandy coast largely undetected, achieving a tactical surprise that was instrumental in the establishment of the beachheads. The initial landings faced fierce resistance, but the element of surprise prevented the immediate deployment of German armored reserves, which were held back due to uncertainty regarding the true scale and location of the assault. The strategic implication of this radio discipline was profound, demonstrating that the absence of information could be as powerful a weapon as the transmission of it. The decision to prioritize silence over immediate communication represented a calculated risk, trusting that the pre-planned movements and contingencies would suffice until beachheads were secured and communications could be re-established. This operational doctrine, born from the necessity of deception, fundamentally altered how large-scale amphibious assaults would be planned and executed in subsequent conflicts, emphasizing the electromagnetic spectrum as a battleground in itself. The quiet crossing of the Channel was a testament to a new understanding of warfare, where the unsaid held more weight than any shouted comma. The digital age, with its pervasive networks and instantaneous global communication, presented a new landscape for the principles forged in the quiet of wartime radio rooms. The lessons of strategic silence, once confined to the limitations of electromagnetic spectrum and human-operated Morse keys, found unexpected resonance in the architecture of modern information warfare. The core understanding that the absence of a signal could convey as much, if not more, than its presence translated into protocols for network defense and offense, where data flow and its interruption became a new form of operational tempo. Cybersecurity doctrines, codified in military and intelligence manuals from the late 1990s onward, began to incorporate concepts of dark networks and stealth operations, directly mirroring the wartime imperative to operate without detection, the deliberate withholding of telemetry, the masquerading of network activity as benign background noise, or the complete cessation of data transmission during critical phases of an operation, all served as digital analogs to the radio operator's calculated silence. Production logs from major defense contractors indicated a 300% increase in the development of low-observable network components between 2005 and 2015, prioritizing systems designed to minimize electronic signatures. The strategic value of this digital silence extended beyond mere stealth. It became a potent tool for deception and misdirection. By controlling the flow of information, or by creating deliberate voids, adversaries could be drawn into false conclusions. Their analytical models starved of expected inputs. Interrogation files from captured operatives, declassified in 2018, frequently detailed training regimens that emphasized information denial as a primary objective, alongside traditional data exfiltration. This denial often manifested as the complete shutdown of compromised systems rather than their exploitation, leaving investigators with a blank slate and an inability to trace origins. The paradox deepened as the sheer volume of global data traffic made individual signals harder to discern, yet simultaneously created an environment where an absence of expected communication became glaringly obvious. The very connectivity that promised transparency also offered new hiding places for those skilled in digital invisibility. A 2019 white paper from a prominent cybersecurity think tank, citing an analysis of 4,000 global cyber incidents, concluded that 45% of successful penetrations involved an initial phase of passive reconnaissance, where the attacker maintained absolute digital silence for periods ranging from weeks to months. This evolution confirmed that the fundamental human element of strategic decision-making, the understanding of when to transmit and when to withhold, remained paramount, even as the technology advanced. The principles of electromagnetic discipline, once painstakingly taught in cramped radio shacks, found new life in the abstract spaces of network protocols and server farms. The quiet determination of a radio operator, waiting for the precise moment to break silence, was echoed in the meticulous planning of a cyber attack, where the timing of a data burst could dictate success or failure. The enduring impact of this legacy could be seen in the design philosophy of advanced communication systems, where burst transmission and frequency hopping were not merely methods to increase bandwidth or resist jamming, but also techniques to minimize the duration and predictability of a signal, thereby reducing its detectability. Unit specifications for the next generation of tactical radios, released in 2022, mandated an average signal duration of less than 50 milliseconds for critical data packets, alongside an adaptive power output that could drop to 10% of maximum when no immediate response was required.